What's your prediction for the fight then?
Prediction?
Yes, prediction.
So why can't Netflix call up Comcast and say, join the bid, but you take the channels? And now, if I'm that interested party, I can lean on Comcast and I can now potentially have sway over NBC and CNN and CBS.
What's going on, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of the Nerd Jet Report. I'm your host, Pablo, and joining me as always is Mr. Brian Schultz. I was considering calling this part 3, but why? Because we're going to end up at part 100, possibly by the end of 2026, maybe. So let's just, updates on the Warner Brothers, Netflix, Paramount, and perhaps others situation. On Monday, he was on with CNBC talking about what had transpired. And basically, he sort of made his case as to why their offer is the best offer and the offer that should have been taken, because it is the best offer. And if you're, looking out for your shareholders and stuff like that, why not get the best offer? He gave us a little bit of details as to what transpired leading up to the announcement of the Netflix deal. And he kind of knew that he was getting ghosted because he was texting Zaz and letting him know we'll be honored to work with you and whatever, and nothing. He knew he couldn't sleep that night, I'm sure. So Brian, what is the latest on the latest facts? Because things change.
Yeah, we need a lot. We're gonna need probably need a lot of Jim Kirk in this one, because there's, again, it always amuses me when you're in a situation where everyone's lying to achieve an outcome, and yet every time they speak, you still hang on their every word as if it's gospel. And so this is a lot of what we're gonna try to do is sift through. Look, not just the bids, because those are gonna change. Almost for certain, but really try to think about, okay, right now we have these two paths on the board. Right now, emphasis. We have a Paramount path and we have a Netflix path. And we wanted to spend a little more time on let's imagine both worlds and try to speculate on how things might be different for us as consumers. Different, emphasize different. Not saying better, not saying worse, although I think worse is probably going to be the betting favorite, but different, because I do think there are clues into how they run their existing businesses that lead you to believe you could see different things as a consumer. And you can decide almost as a fan, like, what do you tend to gravitate to or what would worry you more? So I think that's actually more interesting. But for the specs of the bid, to cut through a lot of the BS.
All of it.
Because pretty much everything here, this is my point, almost everything you're seeing said, including the numbers, is not really real. And I'll explain why. So you have these two bids side by side as they stand today. What you're referencing is David Ellison talking about kind of the lead up to David Zaslav and Warner Brothers choosing Netflix. That is actually official public record in an SEC filing. You're required to basically file for any merger a little bit of the blow by blow of how the deal came to be.
Details, my dear, mere details.
And so one of the things that came out was this sequencing of, in the last several days leading up to the day of announcement, how David Zaslav basically cut off communication with David Ellison. And so that was like a telltale sign. And so this is key, because one of the points that Paramount's trying to make is that communication was cut off before their final bid was heard, meaning Warner Brothers made their agreement with Netflix before they saw Paramount's bid, which means that was a violation of fiduciary duty. That's one of their points of contention, is did WB actually know about the $30 offer before they struck the deal with Netflix or not?
However,
none of that's really relevant. What you need to know right now is, if you're looking at the two bids side by side, there's really only one key difference. Well, there's one main difference. There's other little ones. There's one main difference, which is one is for the entire company and one is for the studio and streamer. And the reason why that's the thing that matters most is because whether you think the two existing offers, whether you think how even you think they are, really comes down to how you value those TV channels that we're not really caring much about. Because Paramount is saying by giving you $30 in cash for the whole thing, that is actually crystallizing more value for the TV channels plus the studio plus the streamer than you will get if you sell just the studio and streamer at $27.75 and then go it alone with the channels. Which basically means, do you think the television, you can do the math, $30, $27.75. What's the difference? $2.25. Do you think those channels are worth more or less than $2.25? If you think it's more, then the Netflix bid is technically worth more. If you think it's less, and history would say you should probably aim less because television channels tend to get worth less every day, ironically in part due to places like Netflix, then the Paramount bid is technically worth more. That's the very 101 version of this right now. To which I say, I'm going to crumple that whole thing up and throw it in the garbage can. Why? Because these bids are going to go higher. At least one of them, maybe both of them. That's how this works. Everyone was sitting there being like, well, this is a number versus that number. That's ludicrous. It's wrong. And it violates every instance of competitive mergers and acquisitions we've ever seen. Paramount is already signaling they'll go to $33 a share. Already signaling that.
That equates to?
Well, that would be a 10% increase on the $75 billion for equity, right? So people are throwing in the debt piece because there's a lot of debt involved. So that's when you see the biggest number, I think it's 82 something for Netflix or even 100 for Paramount. That is an enterprise value number. That includes all the debt. If you're just looking at the stock price, the equity, which is kind of like the bare bones way to look at it, Zaslav wanted $30. He wanted $75 billion for the equity. Paramount met that number. Netflix is at $27.75, but just for part of the company. So they're saying the rest of the company is still independent, the channels. So that's still going to have worth something when you spin it. So Paramount's now saying we'll go 10% on the 75. So we'll go to $82.5 billion for the equity only. That's the rumor. They haven't done it yet, but they're signaling that we're willing to get there. Zaslav is posturing, I want north of 35 now. And the asset is yours. See, this is
25, 35, 75, 45, 55, 30.
This is what happens. Netflix, of course, can counter. They can come over the top. Or I continue to say there's no legal barrier between a third party at the last minute saying, here, I'll give you 90. Here, I'll give you 95. Again, this is something that is not decided by David Zaslav as an individual. It's Zaslav, it's the board, and it's the shareholders who have to vote this through, which is why this term hostile takeover occurs, because you try to bypass the board, you go right to the vote. If you get 51% of the vote, you own the company, right? That's simple democratic math. So again, there's nothing that says another bidder can't show up at the 11th hour, beat both of these guys, and win the asset. That's legally allowed. So my point is, don't take the numbers as gospel because they will not be the final numbers.
Netflix and their offer is just Netflix alone, correct? Making the offer to buy.
Yes, that's correct,
okay,
and that's important in another angle of this. Correct. Right now we have Paramount. Paramount is a consortium, right? Paramount's guidance, this is a really good point by Pablo. Paramount's guidance as a public entity is very small. We're not even having this conversation. If it's Netflix versus Paramount's guidance. That's not who the competition is. It's the consortium of investors and this big looming cloud of how involved is Larry Ellison personally, which Warner Brothers is suspicious of. So this is a point to look at. In the $30 per share offer that Paramount is putting forth, Larry Ellison personally is only putting up about 5% of the deal. Paramount is signaling to Warner Brothers that Larry Ellison is good for whatever you need. But if you look at the actual breakdown of what's in there, he's only 5%. The rest, there's actually 10% coming from Middle East investors. There's other private equity, including a firm associated with Jared Kushner, who you know what family he's connected to. It is a group of people saying we're putting together the cash. And one of the complaints Warner Brothers has reportedly had is they doubt the solidity of that cash because they're looking at the people involved and saying like, yeah, but the big fish is not putting up the biggest share. And David Ellison keeps saying, don't worry, my dad's got you. Netflix is on its own as the buyer, not on its own as the financier of the debt. So they're using Wall Street banks for the debt side of this. But for the stock, Netflix is a stock far bigger, far more powerful than Paramount Skydance, right? And trades at a much higher multiple, which gives you a much more purchasing power in a deal. So the equity piece is Netflix 85% cash and a little bit of stock. Circle that little bit of stock because it matters.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is simply a case of which company can raise its bid on the merits of its own company, this is not a comparison. Netflix can do that.
Yeah.
The question is, does Paramount have more backing to go toe-to-toe?
I mean, just knowing that it's only Netflix making this bid and they can ask, like you said, a third party to come in and add more money to the pot, that's significant. That's significant. And I think Paramount or the Ellisons would shudder at the idea that someone else can come in and just completely blow it out. Even if it's like, let's say, I don't know if I'm not sure where Amazon's head at. Has there been any nothing regarding Amazon, Apple? They're just not interested, apparently, huh?
Well, I didn't say they're not interested. There's
Okay.
other. See, here's the other thing. A merger has math to it. You can't just bid infinitely for an asset. The asset is worth something, and so especially as a public company, you have to be able to present synergies that make it seem like the deal is accretive to your business. I mean, paying Dr. Evil type money for something that's worth nothing will kill you in the eyes of your shareholders.
Yeah.
So when we talk about raised bids, the raised bids still have to compute to where you can go to your investors and say, look, if I put Warner Brothers with Paramount, or if I put Warner Brothers with Netflix, here's how I can save money, here's how I can drive earnings, here's how I can drive revenue so that you guys win over an acceptable time period. If I just show up saying I paid top dollar to get Warner Brothers and now my earnings are lower, stock's going to get hammered like that. It already has, which is already like, that's already a piece of this. So there is a limit to what these companies can bid because they're going to look at the math of the deal and eventually say, look, it's just not worth it. Like we're better off on our own as a stock than we are incurring the headache of this. And it is a headache, right? To get this through, get this integrated, get this rebuilt, even if we get valuable IP on the other side. So let's not pretend that they can just keep bidding and rebidding to the moon with no end in sight. And Zaslav knows that, right? He's extracting top dollar, but everyone's going to be looking at some version of the deal math to see what people can pay, which is why I say Amazon and Apple are also running that math because they're looking at the information that's becoming public now, looking at their own business, their own currency, and they're saying, okay, what if we bid $87 billion for the stock? Or what if we bid 93? Could we make that math work better than they can? And if they think that, then a third bidder could show up and sort of say like, fine, we can make this synergistic to us beyond what they can, and that's the best deal. So these are all sort of TBDs. The other thing that's happening in the middle of this, which I think needs to be paid attention to, is both of the relevant stocks are, and I mentioned this last time with Netflix, both relevant stocks are under a lot of pressure. So we talk about Larry Ellison as the second richest man in the world technically, but he's not like Smaug the dragon sleeping on this mountain of cash and jewels, right? Like most of his wealth is tied up in Oracle. Well, Oracle's down over 40% in the last 2 months, including more than 12% in the past week on their earnings report. 40%. Larry Ellison feels that. I can tell you. That's a lot of money that he's lost personally in his net worth, even though he's still, uber rich. Netflix stock is down nearly 22% in the last 6 months, with most of that coming on the back of this announcement because people are afraid they're going to rebid, and overpay for the asset. So both of these bidders are losing currency as this is occurring. So their purchasing power is going down, which Warner Brothers also has to be sensitive to. Like at some point, it's like you want to get something signed. You want to get that cash in the door because these bidders are losing power a little bit day by day. And Netflix has that little stock component, which, by the way, depending on where the stock prices move, how much stock they have to give over changes hands too, depending. So that also is like a moving target in the value. Whereas like all cash is all cash, right? That doesn't change. You committed to that number. So there's a lot of variables here that people are not really considering. And that's why in the initial show, I kind of said, all these people that were trumpeting Netflix won. I'm like, it's like 60-40. Like it's a real toss-up situation for a lot of reasons. And now that we're in this competitive situation officially, which we predicted, this is not like, hey, somebody over here is a minus 2,000 favorite. This is very, like, each side definitely has some advantages, some disadvantages. And there is this like looming thing of like, as their own stocks crater and there's questions about the bidding power, I would argue that prospect of the mysterious stalking horse third bidder starts to go up. So keep an eye on all that.
I want to reiterate, we are recording on December 14th. Most of the time that we record is on the weekends, right? And then we see what happens in the coming week. So for those individuals out there telling us to do our research, listen to the whole show. Listen to the show.
Yeah,
it might be old news to you, but we've been talking about it before things transpire. And then we get the actual occurrences that lead to our next discussion.
We also do more research than most people do. On what I've heard. In part because I don't deal specifically in these securities, which is why I can talk about it. I do live in this industry, so it is part of what I do. So I do understand some of what's going on. I was saying, to your point about news developments in the last week, there was a very interested party who we said last week was strangely silent. And we figured he was strangely silent, or they were strangely silent because they were in a power position. Everybody needed something now.
I made the point last week, and I said, you guys want me to help? How rich? It is a perfect situation for him because I would say the relationship hasn't always been, or has probably never been great. Talk to Robert De Niro. He'll be the bullhorn for the rest of the industry, possibly.
So let's give you a couple of quotes. Everyone knows who we're talking about and the interested party we're talking about, but it played out exactly as we might have expected, which is silence was code for waiting to see just how much and who wanted something out of this, and then trying to position as kind of the arbiter of succession, shall we say. And no surprise, offered a couple of points that I think are very on brand. First quote, maybe seemed like a surprise, did not come as a surprise to me. Quote, Ted Sarandos is a great man, Netflix is a great company, but then seems like a lot of market share, so we'll have to go through a process. I told you about that 30%, so that got thrown out there. Second quote, and this one I think is the one that really starts to direct traffic. Quote, I wouldn't want to see the same company end up with CNN because I think the people that are running CNN right now are either corrupt or incompetent decision-making. I don't think the people running the company right now and running CNN, which is a very dishonest group of people, I don't think that should be allowed to continue. I think CNN should be sold along with everything. End quote. I told you in all of this, the thing underneath that was really the true gem from that party's perspective was control over CNN. And we talked about it. We told you he was going to be looking to play both sides a little bit to maximize his own return, which is what that first quote about liking Sarandos and liking Netflix is all about. Only one of these bids includes CNN, and it's the Paramount bid. However, let me posit a little door number 3 that I don't hear people talking about, that this interested party might see. And for all things, he sometimes sees angles that are out there. and they're not always like head in the sand. Sometimes I know that comes across. Sometimes it seems that way, but in this case, I saw one that I was like, huh. I do not interpret his comment about CNN as a clear sign that there actually is a true preference for Paramount. I think that's a
red herring.
And the reason I say that is because he was very critical of that same Paramount body for a certain 60 Minutes segment they ran a few weeks ago, saying the new owners are no better than the old owners. That was a warning shot. I would point out to folks that Warner Brothers is looking to create this spinco of the channels, including CNN, and that Netflix has been encouraging them to do that before they would close the deal because Netflix doesn't want TV. Comcast is also doing this early next year. They are creating a company called Versant, which will include a lot of their channels, including MSNBC, CNBC, USA, Sci-Fi Channel, Bravo, a few other things. Things like that. So why can't Netflix call up Comcast and say, join the bid, but you take the channels? And now, if I'm that interested party, I can lean on Comcast and I can now potentially have sway over NBC and CNN and CBS. He might prefer that to Paramount.
Sounds like a lot of problems are solved with that approach.
Have not seen anyone talk about Netflix picking up a phone and calling a partner and saying, Comcast, I know you wanted the studio and the streamer. We're going to beat you for that. But how about this other thing? You want some value? Let's create some value with these channels that nobody seems to want. Why don't you put more of them together? I'm not saying Comcast would want to do that. But I'm simply saying, do not assume that comment about CNN takes Netflix out of the bidding or somehow forces them to buy TV channels they don't want to have.
Yeah.
Partnered bids happen all the time in public and private forums. And divestitures happen all the time in mergers. You often see like mergers go through, Washington gets in the way, no matter what the administration, Washington gets in the way and they say, you know what, for competitive reasons, take this one piece of the business and get rid of it. Well, they don't just send it into outer space. They find someone to take it. They sell it to someone. So that then they bring in a partner, a third party to handle that piece of the business. Yeah. I don't see it as an automatic for Paramount, that comment.
So
what I see is what he cares about, which is control.
Yes.
That party cares about influence over linear TV and the news that's out there about themselves.
It's an interesting situation, man. Definitely an interesting situation. Obviously, this is not over. We got a long way to go. But in that time frame, a lot of interesting things can happen, and we'll be here to sort of discuss all those things as they do. Brian, anything else before we move on to other topics in this scenario?
Yeah, you want to talk about the side-by-side now? Let's assume no third bidder. Let's just say either Paramount or Netflix. For us as consumers, how is that different? We had a couple of categories we put together that I think.
Theatrical, content production, management of DC content, and consumer experience. You want to tackle theatrical?
Yeah, I think it's funny because here's another one where both of them have never loved theatrical so much as right now. What was Netflix's quote? We are deeply committed. Quote, deeply committed.
Deeply.
Oh, it's so deep.
To the theatrical experience. And then I think Paramount, perhaps a little more credibly, given they're already a studio, was like, no, we're looking to install an annual minimum of 30 films that will go to theater. God, so they're both out there squawking that they are pro-theater, pro-theatrical. Let's talk about how would that be different?
Yeah. We've
talked about the Netflix thing a little bit, and I think you'd agree. They support theatrical on their terms. So
Yes.
I think we've talked about this. So let's quickly recap, right? We think there'd be actually more theatrical releases, much shorter windows, and higher velocity, higher turnover. So a movie would not be in the theater nearly as long as it is now. What we didn't talk about, and I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are, how do you think Netflix would approach the type of movie that they allow to go to the theater? So right now, it's totally different because they don't own WB. Right now, basically what Netflix sends to the theater is like, they want to send a few things so they check the box for Oscar consideration. So they'll put them in a handful of theaters for like a week, 2 weeks. They'll do something like a K-pop Demon Hunters where like something blows up on the service, and then after the fact, they'll put it in for like a week, 2 weeks. Again, very limited release. Netflix doesn't do 4,000 screens, full marketing, summer release. They don't do that. But they now will own a studio that controls a quarter of the U.S. box office. So what do you think they would do in terms of a calendar of like what would actually qualify to go to the theater if Netflix was the owner of WB?
I think they would take the sort of same approach that they do now with what movies they put on their content. Analytics would certainly drive that decision making. Also, their consideration in awards, because they want that prestige. I'm not quite certain the mechanism in terms of how do they determine that, because right now their analytics on their platform determine that. In theaters, you get if the movie's good, good. If the movie isn't, you know what I'm saying? It isn't. And we know by box numbers and box office numbers and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
How they would sort of analyze it and make it more efficient for them in order to determine what they put out, that's something they have to sort of figure out. But I think their approach to releasing movies or deciding which movies go up there, I think will be top quality. I don't think they would put movies out that they feel won't make money. And again, that feel like they won't make money part is what I think is going to determine how they sort of decide. That's how I think they'd approach it. I think they'll figure out the sort of mechanisms that will give them some insight as to what sort of movies they put up there. But obviously, they'd want to put out their best because that's what theater experience is, right? You go to experience a movie, whether it be action, horror, they got to be good, I think. They have to sort of try to maximize that sort of situation, I think.
You and I are not totally on the same page about this good thing. I think Netflix, I don't think Netflix sees the world in good and bad. I think they just see it in terms of metrics, and like metrics to them but we know there are bad movies that do big box office and there are great movies that don't find an audience, right? I think we look back on it in history, that's the definition of a cult hit, right? Like cult hit is code for you didn't make money when you came out. And people decided the movie was good over time versus, there are movies that you're like, I have no idea why people like this, but man, a lot of people like this, right? So Netflix, to them, I don't think they see it in good and bad. I think there is a tier of movie that WB puts to the theater that Netflix would actually still put to the theater. They just would do it a little differently, right? In the sense of, let's take Superman. I think that's a really good example. Mm-hmm. So Superman is the classic max budget, max marketing, max screen output type of summer blockbuster that Warner Brothers put out, and certainly would have continued to put out if they were independent. I think Netflix absolutely still will put Man of Tomorrow in the theater, and they'll attempt to put it in as many theaters as they can. But I only think it will be there full go for 3 weeks tops. I think Netflix right now, we found an interesting stat. Yeah, I think you and I were both a little surprised that the average theatrical window is already down to like 32 to 33 days. It's actually a lot lower than you think. Netflix has already kind of pulled the industry this way.
And for them, is like, what's another 2 days?
So they're right, but I think Netflix would see this as an opportunity to go even lower. That's kind of what I would say, right? So they're right now around 30, but I think Netflix would love to be at like 17 or 14 or even 7.
That's crazy.
Depending on the movie. That's why I say, like, for Superman, I think it's a longer leash, right? Superman, I think they view it as like, all right, if a movie like that can do 250 million globally in the opening weekend, we definitely don't want to get in the way of that. If the next weekend is 125, 130 million, we don't want to get in the way of that. Week 3, okay, drops. It's like 65, 70 million worldwide. Great. And after that, now we want it on the service, right? So to me, it's like a movie like that, I think they would still generally support. And where they would try to, like I said, save money is on the marketing. Because I don't think they would spend as much on TV commercials. I don't think they would spend as much on analog advertising. They would just pound the Netflix combined service and just hit you over and over again with commercials for free inside whatever you're streaming. So that's how I think, but I don't think they would put Superman in 500 screens. Like, I don't think they would do that. Likewise, as you said, I think anything they're gunning for an Oscar for, I think they're just going to do lip service the way they do now. Why would they release that wider? You know, like, I look at like one battle after another at the other end of the spectrum. There's no way that movie go. To me, I don't think that movie would have gone to the theaters, or if it did, it would have gone to the theaters just enough for it to qualify for the Oscars if Netflix is in charge. WB basically said, we know we're going to lose money on this because the budget was so high. Netflix would never allow something like that to like go out the door and have a full marketing run and full theatrical run with that premise. We know we're going to lose money on this. The question I have is in the middle. Would they release the stuff in the middle at all? Like, that's the thing I wonder about. Like, would they, you know, a great example to me is like horror, where horror is low budget. When horror hits, it hits. Man, like even recently, look at like Five Nights at Freddy's 2, where like the reviews were atrocious, but that was a known quantity. Young people liked the brand, and like it blew past box office expectations. So like, would Netflix trust in something like a Blumhouse type movie to like put that to the theater and like see what happens? Or would they say, look, horror is a very boom or bust genre. There are a lot of horror movies that just completely tank.
Yeah.
And so therefore, we'd rather just have it on the service right away and have people be scared at home right away and not risk the theater. Like, WB clearly would release that. They had a great year in horror, right? They had The Conjuring, Five Nights. They had stuff. Five Nights at Freddy's. They had a good year for horror. Netflix, I don't know. You know, I don't know if they would bother, right? I mean, didn't they just have? I'm not just pure horror, but they had Frankenstein, right? That just came out. Like there was no thought to really putting that in the theater, was there? I mean, that basically was like, no, we got Del Toro, we got Frankenstein. Looks like it could be a theatrical movie, but no, we're keeping that here. You got to come here to watch it.
I think they have to make decisions that will attract talent and current creators, because right now those people they don't want this to happen.
No.
So they have to sort of do some things or say some things to sort of say so that creators and actors and talent budge a little bit and have some consideration in regards to whether or not they want to work with them in whatever capacity, right? Because right now it's like, no, making phone calls and stuff like that. The big dogs is talking about this shouldn't happen, whatever the case may be. There's an adamant opposition to this whole deal. And so Netflix can't take this whole approach ignoring their concerns, is what I would say.
Yeah. This also leads into, I don't want to have the whole rehash about Netflix buying a theater, but like this whole argument, this right here, the mid section to me is a big part of why buying some theatrical makes sense. to me, because that would control, if Netflix bought Regal or bought a chain of theaters, a smaller chain, some local chains, that controls a little bit for like the horror range of outcomes in my mind. If those films are being shown on screens that you control from the outset, now you can kind of let it play and sort of see like, wow, audiences really showed up for Five Nights at Freddy's 2. They didn't show up for Wolfman. Lead when I was Wolf. Like, but if they're both inside a Netflix controlled theater, they got your money regardless. Does that make sense? So I kind of feel like in a weird way, that's an argument for them to control more of the theatrical experience, which there's no way that Paramount's buying a theater chain, right? So if we're looking at the side by side and we're thinking about this, for big budget, I think they both release the big budget stuff. Paramount lets it have a longer window, more traditional window. Netflix probably shortens that window. So the Oscar fare, Paramount probably puts that in more theaters, but it's not like going to be a 4,000 seat, it's 4,000 screen run either. Netflix does even less probably of that. In the mid-budget, that's where we're like, would Netflix release any of that at all? Paramount clearly would release some of that. That's to get to that 30 films a year number, which I don't think is that. I don't think they're totally lying about because they're a traditional studio. So now they would control more of that studio content. So like, yeah, I think like Paramount is probably, the Paramount theatrical model looks more similar to what you're used to. Mm-hmm. But I do think budgets are coming down. So I don't view that as like Paramount's necessarily spending so much more on theatrical. I think they'd be cutting budgets in a lot of genres, maybe even ours too. I think our budgets need to come down really in superhero and sci-fi spectacle and all that sort of stuff for the most part. Mm-hmm. Because the math is tough, right? Like, yeah, like Zootopia 2, everyone's fixated. But like, you can't underwrite 500, 600 million in China for every film. Like that was something notable. Mm-hmm. But I think for the most part, movies that used to get $200 to $300 million of budget now are probably looking at ways to try to get down to 125 to 150. And then you kind of scale it from there. And I think Paramount will be subject to that. And then you have this nugget of, would Netflix buy a theater chain, which Paramount would not. So that's kind of like how I see this side by side.
If Netflix bought theaters, how would other studio houses, if they wanted to put their movies in theaters, be able to do that if they control those theaters?
Yeah, so that becomes a big question in this deal of licensing, right? Because Netflix has never licensed its own content to any other shop, right? They are a big believer in protect this house, right? You need to be on the Netflix service to access the content. One of the big concerns, I think, in Hollywood is this licensing. Like if Netflix controls too much of the IP and doesn't license it out, I mean, that's more of a monopoly than we've ever had. So this was my posit before of like, if Netflix bought a bunch of theaters and made that work, and that was making them a lot of money, I think there are certain other, like, you don't think Disney would buy a bunch of theaters and put them in Disneyland and Disney World and put them, of course, there are other studios I think that would do the same thing. I just don't know if Paramount's big enough to be one of those studios. I think Universal would. To me, like Universal and Disney make the most sense because they have the theme parks. So like to me, it's like they already have this other physical footprint and way to make money that like sort of is tied to movies anyway. But that's why I posit a weird world where if Netflix broke ground on this, could you see like Amazon owning theaters? Could you see Disney owning theaters, Universal? And they're all putting more captive content into that and trying to monetize that. I don't think it's impossible. Again, I don't think that's good for us because that's going to force us to pay more to go to see these things and limits where we can see it. Yeah. But the reality is if you come up with an idea in Hollywood that makes money consistently, everyone else is going to do it.
My only concern is that if you want to see a movie, you can't see it here. You got to go over there. And there's a lot more decision making that needs to be done in planning.
Again, bad for us, right? This is why, like, someone asked on someone commented on one of the posts about like, well, complaining about the consolidation. And I'm like, and that's why I said at the outset, like, yeah, like consolidation generally doesn't favor the consumer. Like that's, the more monopolistic or oligopolistic an industry becomes, the more power the industry exerts over the customer. But the ship's kind of sailed. Like WB is not going to be independent. Like whether we want it to be or not, it's not going to be independent. So we're just looking at, okay, like how is this going to turn out different? I think the one other theatrical difference that Netflix provides, and this is the one where I was kind of like, this is the one above all else where I was like, this might actually be the one positive I could find, is the Stranger Things model. I think that's going to work. I think it's going to work big time. I think K-pop Demon Hunters was similar to this idea. I think Netflix will, certainly with the ownership of HBO, they will have more prestige TV and they will have more eventized TV that they will then take the finale or take a piece of that series and they will put it on the big screen. I don't see any way Paramount would ever do that. It's not in their model. Bringing TV to the big screen is not what they do. So if you are into that, if you're like, hey, I always wished I could see the Game of Thrones finale on a big screen with people who love Game of Thrones, I think Netflix is going to give you an avenue to do that more in the future. That's something you don't have now as a consumer.
And there's also, I mean, if Netflix wanted to sort of take a piece of the pie when it comes to other studios putting movies in their theaters,
sure,
I think that's a way to look at it as well. Because I'm just thinking about if Netflix owns theaters and all we seen is Netflix created films, and then that shuts out other studios that make movies for theaters, it'll just be a mess. So I think Netflix perhaps would consider, yeah, you can show your movie here, but we'll take a percentage of.
They'll be the theater.
You know,
they'll do what the theater does now. But I'm saying
Exactly.
that feeds the anti-competitive sentiment, right? That like Netflix is controlling too much. They're the gatekeeper of too much in that scenario versus like Paramount is a more, even though they have more power, it's a more status quo traditional view of theatrical, and like they're sending their films to AMC and to Regal, you know, and to different places and to IMAX and what have you. So I think there's that. I think it ties to the DC discussion, what we just said. So I'm going to throw the question right back at you. I put it to this on text. I think the 2026 DC calendar is like tailor-made for this discussion. In the hands of Paramount, I think the 2026 DC calendar looks exactly the way it does now. Right? Clayface, Supergirl, go to the big screen. Lanterns is on HBO television. I argued to you if Netflix was in control of DC for 2026, they would not send one thing to the theater. I don't think Supergirl goes to the theater, and I'm not convinced Clayface does either. And Lanterns is still on HBO.
Nah, I think if Netflix is in control and they have this opportunity to show these in the big theaters, and again, that's for me, you put it in the theaters, you got some, you know, whatever that money is on that weekend, you got that. I don't see them missing out on that opportunity, especially for these movies like Supergirl, which I think we'll talk about it later, has a lot of potential, could have a lot of potential. Let's see. Man of Tomorrow has, again, something to prove whenever that comes out. Green Lantern could follow depending on, because all we've heard regarding Green Lantern is a lot of talk about the potential of this being great. They haven't shown a lot. Even with what they show, they haven't shown a lot.
They basically show one scene.
Yeah.
The real show is one
basically-
scene. They look great.
Yes.
The two of them look like they're going to be great. And if they're great, the show is probably fine. But they have shown no powers, no effects, no space. Like this is the greatest, like we're keeping it close to the chest marketing that we've seen.
So who says that they don't show like they did with Stranger Things, show the last episode or whatever the case may be, if it is that good, if we're going to see spectacular things, right? So I still think that they show these movies in theaters based on its potential. And I think these guys see the movies before they come out, right? The executives or whomever see the movie, and they have to think about the potential of it, right?
I disagree. I think they would look at, so to me, first off, if Netflix, I'm not convinced if Netflix was making Supergirl, they would have, well, we don't know where Supergirl was budgeted. We know it was lower. We don't know how much lower. I think Netflix would be looking at female-led superhero and action movie track record and being like, no effing way that goes to the theater. The odds are so stacked against this that we are much better off saying Netflix is the only place you can see Supergirl and the next chapter of the Superman family saga. Come to Netflix to watch it. I don't think there's any way they would risk putting that in the theater and taking like $100 million loss.
But I also then would say, you got Jason Momoa, you got other things in this film that could potentially bring it over the top. Because yes, it's Supergirl, you know what I'm saying? We've had this discussion many, many times. But when you add these other variables to it, they bring potential. Mm-hmm. And Jason Momoa is one of those characters. He's been a part of a lot of billion-dollar films. Not a lot, but, he's been a part of them. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's him or whatever the case.
He headlined $1 billion movie. I mean, he did.
I get it. Like, we say him and Brie Larson, that time period is pretty bubblicious, but, like, they did headline $1 billion superhero movies. I get it.
I just think for Netflix that they look at that as we control the character, and that's more important. And the safer play is to make you come to Netflix to watch it. I think Clayface is the more interesting debate for the reason I said about horror, where horror does have this track record where if it hits, it can really hit. But Clayface to me also feels more like what Sarandos was talking about, where he highlighted Penguin, and he was like, you take Batman verse and you just build wider and wider and wider around that. And so Clayface is very much feels similar to that idea, to where he might also say, yeah, I want to control Clayface on the service the way we control Wednesday and the way we would have controlled Penguin, and make you come see that. In a weird way, I almost feel like if one or both of those movies was so big on the service, maybe they would consider sending the sequel to the theater, because now they would have the numbers to kind of suggest they could support it. But as first run movies, I'm skeptical. I think for them, the next movies they would see as, yes, theater would be Batman Part 2, unassailably yes, Man of Tomorrow, yes. I think everything else until then, they'd be like, nah, we keep that in-house at Netflix. Whereas Paramount absolutely would send all of this to the theater.
To me, I'm like, look, Clayface, part low budget, is in the Batman world. A lot of potential to see if there's, let's say the rumor comes out, Clayface is fantastic. A lot of surprises. I don't see how you don't put that in the theaters.
I'm with you on this one. I think Clayface is a winner. I think a $30 to $40 million budget where you only need to clear like 120, 150 to make money, and then you could tease Batman himself in the I'm with you. But
they could put that in the movies for like 2-3 weeks and that's it.
I'm with you on this. I think there's a better case for that. I'm just trying to get into Netflix's algorithm and sort of say, like, weighing that against all of the things you just said and saying, yeah, but you have to come and be a Netflix subscriber to see all that. You see, that's what I'm weighing against that. What do they value more?
But I think if you're a Netflix subscriber, having the opportunity, even for those who perhaps may not have Netflix, let's say they go to the theaters, yo, this Clayface is dope, I want to see it again. Is out of the theaters, damn, where can I go see it? I can only go see it on Netflix. I don't have a subscription. Well, now you do, if you want to see it.
You don't have to convince me. I'm just trying to get there. I think there's two sides to this, and I think my point is Batman Part 2. It's not a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Clayface, it is a conversation, and it's an interesting one in terms of how to handle content distribution. And I think we know exactly what Paramount would do. I don't think we know exactly what Netflix would do. But I think this 2026 calendar is like a great, like, we won't know because they won't control it in 26. But if they did, I think it's a great like lab rat to think about for this. I'm going to throw one other angle at you on content. There is this perception that I find funny, which is that like Netflix is automatically more destructive to jobs than Paramount would be in this. And the only reason I say it's a little bit funny to me is if you look at the deal math, they are both publicly touting. Paramount is claiming they can save $6 billion in the combined entity. Netflix is saying they can save $3 billion. And of that $3 billion, over $1 billion is simply on the removal of licensing fees they currently pay to Warner Brothers to have stuff on their service. So obviously licensing fees are not people. Where do you think Paramount is getting a lot of the $6 billion of savings? firing people. So at least at the outset, I get it that people want to say because Paramount's a studio and Warner Brothers is a studio, it protects the existing model, but the numbers technically say that Paramount's looking to chop more heads out of the gate than Netflix is, for what it's worth. Now, over time, I think, it becomes a little bit of a different conversation, but I just point out that sort of interesting side by side, which leads me to who would actually spend more and give you more content over time to consume. Not saying great content, bad content, just who would give you more content, more DC content for you to have. I would argue Netflix will give you more content,
Yes.
for better or for worse. And we talked a little bit about this last time. I think Netflix would go this way. It would be like there'll be 7 different Batman running around on the Netflix service, depending on the different creators pitching different adaptations and different arcs, some animated, some, quasi-animated, some live action. There'll be like an adaptation of this comic, and there'll be, the ongoing verse. And like, I think they would just go broad and wide. And that's the point of the Sarandos quote about wanting to go deep into these IPs, and they would flood the zone and give you lots of it to watch.
I think for Netflix, you have the option of going to the comic books and let's bring this live action comic book. And then for the movies, you bring original stuff. For movies, you create original stuff. I don't mind the multiple Batman in a sense of creating stories based on comic book storylines that we've seen in the past and bringing them to life. But it comes to originality stuff like Matt Reeves' Batman and stuff that we've seen.
Honestly, I think as much as the Snyderverse thing is like this running joke, I actually think Zack Snyder's Dark Knight Returns, this is the best odds for that one project to happen.
Yes.
Because Netflix, even though they're getting out of the Zack Snyder business more broadly, would see the value of, as you said, Matt Reeves is making a Batman over here, and we've got, maybe James Gunn is still around doing a Batman something over here, Brave and the Bold, and then Zach wants to do a real hard R Dark Knight Returns. Well, Netflix would actually see that, I think, as valuable as a decentralized model of content around the character. Would it all be good? Absolutely not. Right? We know that. But some of it will be, just like it is now. That's the thing. If you look at Netflix now, it's like you get handed all these anime manga adaptations, like, maybe 1 out of every 4 of them is good, but that one is usually really good. Like, we even talked about some of the animated shows on Netflix that we've covered, right? Like, Blue Eye Samurai's it, and that's as good as it gets. And it's like, and then you've got like a Tomb Raider, Terminator, Zero, like what a Terminator Zero. There's some stuff that's good, like it's not bad, and then there's some stuff that's unwatchable, right? And it's like, but there's a lot of stuff, is my point. Like, they just give you this horizontal model. And I think they would do that with DC.
It's no different than you going to Blockbuster and picking out a movie that you've never seen or heard of before and taking the chance to see whether or not it's good or not, Yeah. You just do it from the confines of your living room, which is Netflix. At the end
This just goes to my point of, I think the James Gunn question is irrelevant to Netflix because I believe they would decentralize DC. They would accept DC content from a lot of different creators, and their focus would be controlling the character within the Netflix ecosystem and making you come to Netflix to see all things Batman, all things Superman, all things Justice League. I think Paramount would retain, not necessarily James Gunn, because we've heard that rumor that David Ellison prefers Michael DeLuca run it, but the idea of a czar, the idea of someone to shepherd DC content for the combined entity. I think Paramount is more likely to keep that model, the creator model, the creator-producer model. Whereas I think Netflix, is really going to blow that up because they've gotten away, as we said, they've gotten away from the top dollar creator model already in the rest of the service. The last thing is, as a consumer, we've given you some side, like what do you think, if you say none of these is going to be a perfect solution and there's going to be less competition, that probably means we're going to pay more and we're probably going to be unhappy to some extent. Which of those models excites you more from a possibilities standpoint? I think that's really the question. Like, if you're sitting there saying, I'm going to get more uncertainty about theatrical, maybe less theatrical or quicker theatrical. I'm going to get a lot more content in the IPs that are being acquired, but it'll come from different creators and they'll be kind of all over the place with no single universe. Or I want a model which is a little bit more like what I have now. Someone's in charge. I'm getting an interconnected universe. I'm getting something that's more cinematic, a few satellite TV shows along the way. Like which of those paths do you think you want to live in?
A DC universe for me, again, is bringing that content that we've seen in the comics and the storylines that we've seen in the comics to life. That building, Brian, that building of excitement, because again, we've already seen that it worked. We saw at a magnificent sort of experiment that they attempted, and it worked. It hasn't worked with DC.
Okay.
So I think there would be more of a strategic approach with DC rather than randomness. That's mine. I just don't want to see. Sure, I'm gonna see it. You're gonna see me. You're gonna show me Batman, a series of Batman. I'm there. But at some point, we gotta build towards. And once we gotten through the Rogues Gallery, however long that takes, then there's Justice League and team ups and all these other things that you just can't throw up on screen. You just can't do it because it's not going to give you, I think, the returns that you're looking for. So my thinking is if with DC especially, because that's what I really care about. You know, that's the thing that I'm going to notice.
Yeah.
Is creating this universe and this world and these scenarios that occur that lead that move us forward to the ultimate thing. And we get this grand finale, and it's just a thing that I think it shouldn't be ignored and just do whatever. And let's see what happens. And look at the analytics and see.
No.
That's not what I want.
Consider Pablo in the Paramount camp. I love it. I feel like you're like the dudes in Last Crusade where the Grail is like just out of reach, and you just won't let that go. Because like I've been there, I touched it once. I gotta get back.
Young.
I understand the allure. Actually, I don't disagree with like I would love to have seen the DC characters accomplish a path similar to what Marvel did, because I will say like my personal affinity is more to DC characters, like just my own fandom and experience. I gravitate more to the individual arcs and stories of the Justice League members and DC side. I'm a little more open to the alternative only because I feel like maybe it's just I'm dealing in the realism of what we're doing now is not working. Mm-hmm. But I just, that fatigue continues to grow. And I will say that my response to the current iteration of the DCU we have right now, while I kind of trying to keep my mind open, has been lukewarm. I haven't been blown away. Mm-hmm. And I think to your point, the one thing I will say about what you're asking for is, while we know from the Marvel model you don't need to be blown away at every single stop along the tour, you do need to be blown away enough times to keep that momentum building.
Going, yeah.
And I'm just not convinced that we're in a world where like you can readily achieve that with the existing model. So I guess there's a part of me that's always craved, especially in DC, because the animated world was so good for so many years, wanting to simply see those remade as live action. And there's a part of me that looks at the Netflix avenue of like,
so you're telling me there's a chance? Yeah!
That they could take, Justice League Doom and, Crisis of Infinite Earths and like do these individual epic arcs that were made into good animated movies and just do them live action. And even if they're not interconnected or even if they're just two-parters, if I get to see them in good creators' hands one time, even if I have to sacrifice going to the big screen to do it, maybe I'm open to that. I know that I'll be getting a lot of garbage. I'll be clear. Like, that's what I mean. Like, there's a lot of Netflix stuff that is crap and is unwatchable. But like they're also, the irony of all this? What I am describing Netflix doing to DC, or what I think they might do to DC, is kind of what Warner Brothers did to DC before all this.
Sure.
Right? Remember, like back in the old days when they were a mess, and it was like it felt like the individual creators weren't talking to each other, but they were making individual pictures, and then the animated was doing its own thing. Like I'm kind of describing Netflix bringing WB back to that. And weirdly, like when I talk about Netflix, like taking over this studio and like, they're doing live sports and they're doing some other event type stuff. It's like, what I'm basically describing is a cable company. I mean, how is it any different, right? Like Netflix is basically becoming a cable company. It's like you think about your cable provider back in the day. It's like, all right, you pay for your ESPN package, you pay for your premium HBO package. Like, how's Netflix going to be any different if they start introducing tiered pricing? And the tiered pricing is so you can get all the different things they have content-wise. That's a cable company, minus the cable.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like it feels like we're actually sort of reverting in some ways with this.
Here's what could happen. It could be something glorious. If Netflix gives us crap, DC crap, and we've said this before that DC fans would be more vocal towards the crap, you run into an instance where DC Snyderverse fans and regular DC that polarizing will come together in unity. Going after Netflix and saying, "Yo, what are you doing to our stuff?" You know what I'm saying?
Would it matter though? Like when Netflix would be like,
Yeah,
it's funny.
'cause
I just watched Ready Player One with my kid last night. Netflix would be like putting the dome shield around the DC verse, and here come all the characters trying to assault their way in.
But here's the thing: if they were to give us crap, then that's money being left on the table for what the potential could be, and I don't know if they want that either.
I don't think they care, man. They own Batman. And they're going to say there's enough people in the world that will pay to come see Batman no matter what Batman we give you. But Netflix's track record would say not everything they put out is crap. That's why I bring out, like, think about the things on Netflix that have been great, right? We talk about, like, Blue Eye Samurai came out of nowhere. Like, that might be the best animated thing that's been made in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
That came out at Netflix. So Netflix is a believer of Jackson Pollock. You throw stuff up on the wall and some of the colors jump and some of them don't. And like, I think they would do that with DC. And I think that's the question as a consumer of like, if you get this disconnected world, but let's say Zack gets to make Dark Knight Returns and he kills it, and then like, let's say James Gunn gets to do something offbeat and batty with his Wildcat and the characters on the mural and he kills it. And like, you have both of those on the same service, like, and then alongside that, you have a bunch of stuff that fails. Is that
I just don't want to
is
see
that
a lot
better,
of
same,
Jupiter's
or
Legacy.
worse than one person shepherding the model and also having like having some hits, having some misses, but also it's like we'll talk about it with the Supergirl teaser where it's like that one tone, that one vision drives all. It can work. Yeah. We saw it work, as you said, to the tune of one of the great cinematic runs of all time. But we're also now experiencing it not working on both sides.
Yes.
And nobody's happy. So I hear you. What you describe, the utopia you describe, I would love to live in. Yeah. I just feel like I'm not in that utopia now. And so my ear might be more open to something that's a little dirty and a little grimy, but might give me like scraps of what I want. And it's different. So we'll see.
I just can't see. We can't get a lot of Jupiter's Legacy type situation. We just can't get that. Jupiter's Legacy was something that I was really looking forward to seeing, and the execution of that was just, imagine that was Justice League that you were watching and not Jupiter's Legacy.
But see, I was just gonna say that, and I was just gonna say if it was Justice League, I bet you the viewership would have been 10x what Jupiter's Legacy was, and Netflix wouldn't care. We'd care. We'd be savaging that show. We'd be all over that show on this. There'd be fans all over the comments section of all these shows being like, they are trampling on these characters. But you know what? Netflix would be looking at like, as I told you, Madam Web and Aquaman Lost Kingdom spent
That's
a lot of
crazy.
time in their top 10. Those movies are atrocious.
That's crazy.
But they spent a lot of time in the top 10. So the Netflix algorithm was looking at that being like, that can work. That's what I'm saying. They don't care about that stuff. They look at what's
Garbage can work.
Never seen garbage eat garbage before. Like,
I just don't want to waste my time seeing stuff like that, especially with characters that you know that we grew up watching that have dope storylines, yo, and being brought to garbage, nah.
I get it. It's just no one wants to see garbage. I think the question is, as I said, it wouldn't all be garbage. So if the price of one epic product is 4 pieces of garbage, is that better or worse than what we have now? That's really kind of, to me, like if we're talking about the question, because Paramount, I think, does preserve more what we have now in a DC sense.
Yeah. The saga continues.
Yeah, good stuff.
A whole bunch of stuff to sort of think about. Let us know in the comment section below. We've probably said a lot of things here that makes you wonder, disagree with, agree with. What is it that you guys hope for with this acquisition if it goes through? What is it that you guys hope that Netflix does with this content? Let us know in the comment section below. Remember to hit that like and subscribe. Yeah, and if you haven't heard it anywhere else, you heard it here first on the Nerd Gen Report.